So for those of you that don't know him, this is John Bailey. I've had the good fortune to know him for a number of years, but I've visited him about 4 times in the last week, and I've had a marvellous time. And this is why I say to you that I get the best deal at the Old Fliers Group, because I'm in on the ground floor talking to your speakers, getting all sorts of stories from them which you don't get in the long run. But you get a pretty good deal too.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk today about my part in the victory of World War II, was my contribution, and also how we were denigrated by a British MP at the end of the war. I already had a pilot's license when I was 14, because opposite my school in the UK, in Thurmaston, in Leicestershire, was Taylorcraft, and I was at a modern school, and Taylorcraft, in conjunction with a beer baron, a fellow called Lindsay Everhard, who had Everhard's Burton Ales, put up a flying scholarship, and at 14 I won the flying scholarship, and Lindsay Everhard himself had his own airfield, a place called Ratcliffe on the Reap, and his wife also was a pilot, and they had 2 puss moths, and she taught me to fly in a puss moth. She was a friend of Amy Johnson and Amelia Earhart and all those famous women aviators, Jean Batten, the New Zealand girl. So it wasn't until, of course, I was 19 years of age in 1941 that I joined the Royal Air Force, and of course, the first thing I tell you is you don't know anything about flying. I mean, the fact that you've been flying for years since you were 14, and I kept up my hours and worked in the movie business in America, and I kept up my hours over there too. So I went then to 7 FTS. I did my elementary flying training, which was on Tiger Moths, of course, and then on to advanced flying training school, where I went on to Harvard and Hurricanes, and so I was going to be a fighter pilot flying Hurricanes. The Hurricanes that I was on were 2 Cs, which had 4 20mm cannon, and in 1942, as you know, France capitulated and Britain stood alone, and France, of course, was divided by the fact that they had the Vichy government under Laval and Pétain, and the Free French. So, and North Africa itself was controlled by the Vichy government. Churchill was quite perturbed about that and decided to do something about it. So, between Britain and America and the Free French also, they decided to form Operation Torch and make landings in 3 places: Casablanca, Algiers and Oran. The landings took place in May 1942. No, I think they're November 41 actually. In November 41, and went quite well. And virtually in 3 days, we had actually won that part of the battle as far as landing was concerned. But that was only the beginning of it, of course, because when I arrived there, we were in Algiers, and there was a terrific air raid, and we were in the yacht club, and we were stuck there all night. They lit the smoke pots, and all the lights went out, and so it wasn't until the next day that we finally could move to Maison Blanche, which was the airfield there, and then we still were waiting for our aircraft to arrive, our Hurricanes, and they arrived at Blida, which was an airfield at the back of Algiers, and we eventually went up there and joined 73 Squadron up there with Hurricanes. The Hurricane, of course, was a superb aircraft as far as a gun platform, and it was an excellent, very easy to fly, very easy to repair, but of course it didn't have the glamour of the Spitfire, although in the Battle of Britain it had actually shot down more German aircraft than the Spitfire, but of course the Spitfire was concentrating under higher altitude on the fighters, and the RAF was the Hurricane was being used mainly against the bombers. So Harrison's are odious anyway. So both aircraft were superb in the role that they did. So anyway, Operation Torch was then organised, and I sailed from the Clyde on a ship called the Duchess of York, which is a CPR liner, and of course we had no idea where we were going, but we sailed, and we passed the Straits of Gibraltar and continued south down the coast of Africa. Then we reversed and went back up. I guess this was supposed to fool the Germans. I don't think it did much. And eventually we entered the Straits of Gibraltar and arrived in Algiers. As we came around the Bay of Biscay, this ship started to roll, and it rolled, we were told by the crew, 43 degrees, and it stood there on its beam ends and didn't know how to come upright. And it was called by the crew the Drunken Duchess. The Drunken Duchess. And she'd go 43 degrees the other way. And however, she finally landed us in Algiers, but on the way back, we believed she was torpedoed. We were moved then to Blida and at the back of Algiers, and the battle started down towards Tunis, and eventually arriving in Tunis to El Aouina. And from there we went to Tripoli. We battled down to Tripoli, strafing the Germans. And then we moved to Palestine, to Akia, and which was 76 OTU, and converted onto Wellingtons for the attacks on Sicily. The Germans were now strongly entrenched in Sicily. The Sicily landings were airborne. They were our first airborne ones from outside. Unfortunately, when the main attack arrived, the Germans had also arrived with Junkers 88s and strafing everything inside. And the anti-aircraft guns shot down about 12 Albemarles with their gliders and 10 Dakotas. So it was quite a disastrous beginning, but eventually we managed to drive them out of Sicily, and the battle for Italy then began. Then moved to 1675 Heavy Conversion Unit at Abasware in Egypt, near Cairo, and converted on to Liberator B-24Js. We sailed on the Cape Town Castle actually from Alexandria then to Taranto in Italy. Took the train to Foggia on the Adriatic coast, and Amendola was the field near Foggia, shared with the American 2nd Bomb Group B-17s. Our job there was to supply Tito's partisans. We flew in at low altitude and right on the deck and dropped supplies. We found all kinds of strange things going on there. We actually, as we were on a daylight drop, a Dakota was flying around, and fellows were standing in the doorway of the Dakota, which was open, and we could see they had German uniforms. They were spotting what we were doing from this captured DC-3. Our bombing missions were pretty dicey because we had long flights like Ploesti, and then all over enemy territory, and then of course the Warsaw airlift, in which we lost a lot of aircraft. Picture of my Hurricane. I inherited this aeroplane from the British Army because at one stage when I was spotting for the artillery in North Africa, I was attached to a British Army group, and I was spotting for their artillery. And the captain of this outfit was John Foyle, who owned the biggest bookshop in the world in London. And we got on very well, and he said to me when we'd finally beaten the Germans there, he said, when you get a permanent base, I'll send it up to you. I'm not going to give it to the Air Force, it's on an army manifest. So he sent it up to me eventually when I got on to Liberators up at Amendola. My Hurricane turned up. The CO, who was ground staff, I didn't like aircrew very much, he was the groupie. By that time I was a flight lieutenant. He said to me, "You might have an aeroplane, but you're not going to get any fuel." But one day an American guy came over and he was a co-pilot on the B-17s. And he said to me, "I've got a picture of him standing beside my aircraft," and he wrote on the picture, "A guy can dream, can he not?" Because he'd been trained on P-38s and hated flying bombers, you know. So he said to me, "I'd love to fly it. Do you think you could go through the cockpit drill with me?" He said, "I've flown quite a few fighters." So I said, "Oh yes, should be okay." "Well, I can't get any fuel." He said, "Don't worry about that." He said, "I'll get you fuel." He sent a truckload of jerry cans over in the night. He said, "Does the CEO live on the base?" I said, "No, he lives in a villa some way away." He said, "Okay, we'll come over tonight." So they came over with all the jerry cans and refueled my aircraft. And he said, "Could I do a couple of circuits of bumps? Can you light the flare path?" So we lit the flare path. And he did a few circuits of bumps and he was quite happy. Later on, when the war was almost over, they came over again and said to me, "We've got a fellow in Paris who's got all this French lingerie and French perfume. And he's collected it all for our wives and girlfriends, but we can't get an aeroplane. Do you think if we stripped everything out of your kite except the IFF, you would put drop tanks off a Mustang on it? Do you think you'd fly to Paris?" So I did 2 trips to Paris, landed at Orly, and brought that back. So that was what was happening with my Hurricane. Also, everyone lived in tents, including the CO at Amendola airfield. And in 1944, the Americans said to me, "Look, can you get scotch? Can you get some scotch for us?" You know. So I said, "Oh, I think so." So I got a couple of Johnny Walker bottles, empty Johnny Walker bottles, and we'd go in the mess and get a double. Could be Seagram's Rye, could be anything. And we just filled up these bottles and sealed them with wax. And eventually I got 4 bottles of scotch for them, and they built me a hut with a barrel stove and 4 bunks and mosquito nets and opening windows. And I was the only guy on the base who had, of course, by that time I was a squadron leader. And the CEO wasn't very popular, but he got posted, fortunately, so that was okay. Our Pathfinder squadron was 614. Tom Scotland, who used to live in here, was...
Can I interrupt? Can I interrupt just a moment? That's John's hut there.
Yeah, that's my hut. Yeah. Our Pathfinders flew Halifaxes, and Tom Scotland, who used to live up here, and used to come to the meetings, was one of the top guys on that, and has written a book about it too. We had wonderful ground crews, and we never had a single problem with the aircraft as far as engines or the maintenance was just wonderful. I say from Foggia we did all the supply drops to Tito in Yugoslavia. We did the Warsaw airlift, which was very dicey because it was totally over enemy territory. And in Warsaw we actually flew down the streets of Warsaw below the level of the tall buildings with Liberators hanging on the props on 3/4 flap, dropping supplies and trying to find the groups of partisans in side streets and everything. Absolutely crazy. But we lost a lot of aircraft as well. On the supply drops to Tito, we used to go in pretty low down and sometimes down as low as 20 feet off the deck, you know, to make sure we got in there because we flew down all these valleys and pretty mountainous country there. By the prop. My window blown out and 2 engines, both of my starboard engines are feathered, damaged by anti-aircraft fire, and this was coming back from Warsaw. We had 2 Polish interpreters at the front there with us. They said 2 of them in case you lose one, he's expendable, you see. But that in case we got force down, and we got with the partisan group that they could speak for us, and we could probably help them too. Anyway, I had, fortunately on the Liberator you have tank to engine and cross feed, so we cross fed all the fuel over into the port wing and keeping everything throttled back as much as we could and hanging in the air and jettisoning a lot of stuff, the guns and various other things. We finally came in on one wheel and then locked down and we were okay. We got home all right. One of our trips, we went to Monfalcone on the Adriatic, which is the top of the Adriatic Sea, and we were bombing the port installations. One of our aircraft was bombed by another aircraft above it. It was on the squadron leader. Swain was the pilot, and the mid-upper gunner was an Australian fellow, pilot Officer Lewis from Sydney, and he called up and said, "Skipper, there's an aircraft above us with the bomb doors open." The skipper said, "Can't move, I'm on the bombing run." The next thing, 12 500-pound bombs came down, and the first one smashed the turret to pieces and bruised the gunner's shoulder, went out through the side of the aircraft, tore a hole you could put a mini miner through, and took the auxiliary generator, the putt-putt as we used to call it, with it, and the other one took number 2 engine reduction gear and propeller. They continued on, bombed the target and flew home. So we've got a series of pictures somewhere we can show some other time.
Yeah, oh, there it is, John.
Oh, you've got it there, you can see that. Among our pilots, we had a fellow called Warrant Officer Smith, who was an Australian guy, and Smithy was always too early on the target, and he was always in trouble for burning too much fuel. We were supposed to burn no more than 200 gallons an hour, but Smithy used to be always in trouble for burning too much fuel and also too early on the target. So when we went to Monfalcone, we were supposed to go in last because we had special stereo cameras and colour camera on our aircraft. So we bombed, and there was an island off the coast, and after you'd bombed, they said, fly west, avoid that island before you come south, then you come south down the coast of Italy, and avoid that island at all cost. So we had left the target, and my tail gunner called me and said, there's an aircraft behind us, Skipper, and it's crossing the island, and you can hardly see it for flak. I said, well, it's not one of ours. We lost the last one in. He said, no, it's definitely a Liberator. So we get back, and we're halfway through the briefing, and Smithy comes in dragging his parachute, shaking his fist, and he says, you bastards cut me off the target. He said, I got there early, he said, did a dog leg, couldn't get back in, the mainstream's coming through. So it was really jumping up and down, raving about it. So that was Smithy. Years later, at the Air Force Club, we had a Liberator Club meeting, and I could see this fellow. I saw him from behind, and he was looking at a book, and I walked up behind, and I recognised him, Smithy. I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, Smithy, what are you doing here? He said, oh, I'm West Australian. He said, I live at Hammersley. I said, what? So I went up there, and he had pictures of me and all about the crew and everything, you know. So since then he's passed away, but it's such a crazy small world. I had no idea he was a West Australian at that time, of course. So this is a picture of the bomb craters. Yeah, that's Monfalcone. The rest of the pictures are about the flight to Warsaw with supplies, because they proposed to do the flight from England, but the distance was too great, and to support the partisans with supplies, and so they decided to give us the job. Well, of course, we're flying from Italy, and we were constantly across terribly heavily defended enemy territory. By that time, of course, Germany was getting pushed back, and although the fighter force was depleted, the the anti-aircraft fire was increased because they moved all their guns back and they had much more firepower. So it was a pretty dicey business, and we lost 19 aircraft out of 37 on one raid, so it was very bad. You can see that it was terrible for those poor people and the Polish people. And the sad thing is that at the end of the war they weren't even in the victory parade because they didn't want to upset the Russians. I think that's pretty disgraceful, isn't it? And you can see there the flight distance we had to travel. Very dangerous country. We encountered quite a few enemy fighters there. 262s, which we call flying farts because they were the first jets, and a couple of 163s, rockets. The rockets came screaming through our aircraft on the daylight operation, and of course heavy ground fire as well, because as I say, the Germans were being pushed back into that area. Now I come to the fact that at the end of the war, Lady Astor, an American MP in the British Parliament, called us the D-Day Dodgers, as we were not at Normandy. We had been in Europe for 9 months and had 1 million German troops trapped there. The song, the D-Day Dodgers, went like this. We're the D-Day Dodgers out in Italy, drinking all the vino and always on the spree. Boys of the CMF we are, we take a drink in every bar, because we're the D-Day Dodgers, the boys in Italy. Landed at Salerno, holidays with pay. Jerry had a band out to cheer us on our way, showed us the sights and made us tea. We all sang songs, the beer was free, because we're the D-Day Dodgers, the boys in Italy. On the road to Florence we had a lovely time, took a bus to Rimini up through the Gothic line. Soon to Bologna we will go to Jerry's Gone across the Po, in front of the D-Day Dodgers, the boys in Italy. So, Lady Astor, take heed of what you say. Next time you're on the platform, just talk a different way. We know you're a sweetheart, the nation's pride, but your big mouth is much too wide. And that's from the D-Day Dodgers, the boys in Italy. Look among the mountains, in the mud and rain, you will see rows and rows of crosses, and some that bear no name. Heartache and toil and suffering gone, beneath the soil they slumber on. Some of the D-Day Dodgers, the boys in Italy. I hope you enjoyed my talk, and Brian's also. I must thank him also for his help in putting it all together. Thanks very much. Thank you.